All right, now you're gonna make yourself comfortable. That's what I see.
Thank you, sir. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
Thank you for being here this evening. The preacher at Lyons and his wife, their son, took his life last night. He was a deacon at Northside and leaves a wife and two. The preacher at Lyons and his wife, their son, took his life last night. He was a deacon at Northside and leaves a wife. Emporia Avenue. Oh, okay. You said Emporia Avenue right here. He's their oldest son, and he leaves a wife and two children. Remember that family in your prayers. Remember the special collection Sunday. The two boxes are back there if you want to take a look at them and kind of see what they look like before you put your money in them. We'll have one for the Marceaus and one for other special needs. And Brenda and Amy are redoing the missions bulletin board out there. And one of the things she did was contact Bob Miranda for a picture and a little bit of an update from him. Just got a real nice short update from Bob. He said, since the pandemic, we stopped travel altogether. However, what we were afraid to do before, we have become experts, that is, using social media and online communication tools. They found grace in the wilderness. We've actually strengthened our ties with many brethren across Latin America and even Portugal and Spain. We have provided more Bible knowledge. We hold several Bible studies daily, Monday through Saturday, and I get to preach Sundays in different countries at their worship services. We've held leadership workshops with elders, deacons, and preachers. We hold a 2-hour preacher training class Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday mornings. There's so much more to say. So the gospel goes on.
Hey, Gary. Hey, I had asked today about the checks, the boxes. Just make those out to the church.
Make the checks out to the church. Just make them out to Church of Christ.
That's what I told.
Yeah, just make them out to Church of Christ. And if you have one special need that you're interested in, put a Post-it note on it. And when we find the Post-it notes in the bottom of the box, we'll put them back on something and they'll go. So, now you don't want to put a memo line, just make them out to the church.
Sing song number 452, 452. Sing the first, second, and fourth verses. 452. Standing on the promises of Christ my King, through eternal ages let his praises ring. Glory in the highest I will shout and sing, standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of God, my Savior. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises I cannot fail. When the howling storms of doubt and fear assail, By the living word of God I shall prevail.
Standing on the promises of God.
Standing on the promises of God, my Savior. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises, I cannot fall. Listening every moment to the Spirit's call. Resting in my Savior as my all in all. Standing on the promises of God.
Standing on the promises.
Standing on the promises. Standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing, standing.
I'm standing on the promises of God.
Let's pray. Dear Father, thank you for this time that you have allowed us to come here to worship you and study a portion of your word. Pray that you be with the teachers tonight as they recall what they have prepared. And be with us throughout the rest of the week. Keep us safe and guide us and help us be good examples for your church. That's all I pray in your son's name. Amen.
Jason, oui. Bonsoir, mon petit chou.
Did you just call me a cabbage?
Yeah, I did. Mon petit chou. Comment allez-vous?
Muy bien.
Good.
You're not
No, we're not
Come
on.
on, Gary.
I am too. It's right here. See, look. See the green light?
there.
It's just something twixt here and there. There's a young couple that comes on Sunday nights and they sit over here.
Yes.
You probably don't know them because she's quite a bit younger
Well,
than you
she's
are.
older than I am.
She's quite a bit younger
She's
than you are.
way older than
Her
me.
sister has been doing mission work in Peru.
Her daughter's been doing mission work in Peru.
Oh, I thought it was
That's
her
my niece.
The one that comes here is your niece?
No, that's my much older sister.
I think that's your much younger sister.
She's my much older sister.
Okay.
Who right now is visiting my mother and might actually be watching. So I want to stress how much older
Well, I'm
she is.
going to stress how much younger she is.
Okay.
And she wants to do something next month called Coffee in the Country.
Coffee in the country. Yes.
So if anybody wants to know anything about it, you want to be sure and buy a program Sunday morning. Those what programs we have?
Oh, we have one of those.
But there used to be bulletins. Now they're programs. Now that they're quarter
I thought
apiece.
you were getting into marketing now that we're calling this the Jason and Gary show.
That's it. So anyway, the problem is, what are the guys going to do? And I had a list, and I'd left it in my office. It was really a cool list. What the guys going to do? Like
breakfast at the bungalow?
Oh yeah, breakfast for boys, or
Sausage in the savannah?
yeah, gravy for guys,
Yeah. Oh, now you're talking. Bacon for boys?
bacon for boys,
Oatmeal for ogres?
yeah,
Hey,
or like vittles for villains.
vittles for villains.
Yeah, I think vittles for
Oh,
villains.
hey. Yep, my sister's watching.
Oh,
So,
let's
did I stress how much older she is? She just had her 55th birthday.
no,
No, it wasn't quite that.
no, I don't think it is. But you'll never see a banana pie again.
Oh, I'm on a diet anyway. Oh,
I'll eat your banana pie.
okay.
Tonight we're going to be talking about
Revelation.
Revelation. If we divide it up into 7 sections, as we have discussed, this is section 6. We are getting dangerously close to the end. And
What are we going to do next?
I was going to ask that same question.
I'll beat you to it.
I know it. See, that's the tough thing. We don't know what we're going to do next. But anyway, we'll worry about this.
We've talked about it.
We did, but we didn't decide a single thing. Section 6 is going to be chapter 17 through first 2/3 of chapter 20. And it begins in chapter 17 with a vision of judgment and an explanation. It's kind of an overview of what you're going to be talking about in chapter 18. Chapter 17 is sort of a preview with an explanation.
It is.
And then there's going to be judgment against Babylon, against the two beasts, and against the dragon. And notice that they exit in reverse order.
From the order they came in.
Right, they came
Yeah.
in, dragon, two beasts, and Babylon, the harlot, and now they're going to go out in opposite directions. In chapter 17, the first two verses begin pronouncing judgment on that great harlot. And one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and spoke with me, saying, "Come here, I shall show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality." She's called the great harlot who sits on many waters, and later in this chapter we'll find out what many waters are. Mm-hmm. But it'll only confirm what we already know, is that they represent peoples, nations, peoples. And we're not just guessing, because later in the chapter it says that that's what these waters are. The kings of the earth commit acts of immorality, and they're drunk with wine of her immorality. How often in the Bible does God compare spiritual unfaithfulness with immorality?
It's a common theme.
It's a very common theme. And so these are people who are looking to other things other than God. And he says they're guilty of committing acts of immorality. In fact, they're drunk with the wine of her immorality. In verses 3 through 6, we see that the scarlet beast that she's seated on. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. There again, this is kind of a common theme. Mm-hmm. And the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her immorality. And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered greatly. Now before, it had the mystery. You know, Babylon the Great is a mystery. Mm-hmm. And now he's the one that wonders. John is the one who wonders greatly. She's in the wilderness, and here's another one of those juxtapositions. Earlier, you saw a woman who was taken into the wilderness, mm-hmm. and that was God's people that was taken into the wilderness, where she was protected. And now we have the other side of that. Here we have this great harlot who's taken into the wilderness, but she's not taken into the wilderness for being protected by God. Right. It's just the opposite. But she's covered with these blasphemous names, and the 7 heads and the 10 horns we've talked about, and we'll see a little bit more in detail in just a little bit. But the 7 heads that authority, and the horns, the power, 10. We don't have to worry how 10 horns fit on 7 heads with 7 crowns and how they all fit, because that's not the point. Mm-hmm. It's the symbolism of the 7 heads and 10 horns. She's clothed in purple and scarlet. And who usually dressed in purple and scarlet? Royalty. It's usually royalty that dresses in purple and scarlet. She has assumed that position, and of course, when we see who she is, then that's obvious that she has assumed the position of authority and power. And she's adorned with gold and precious jewels and pearls. And it reminds me just a little bit of when we were in Proverbs, and we saw wisdom, and we saw the foolish woman, mm-hmm. that she makes herself look all attractive, right? And the poor unsuspecting people don't know that it's just a trap, and it's just a front.
It's dishonest.
It is.
It's a disguise.
Yeah, it's a sickening disguise, mm-hmm. that she presents herself so beautifully when she's holding a gold cup full of the abominations and unclean things. Mm-hmm. And so you have this beautiful golden cup, but look what's inside it. All of the terrible things. And there's a name on her forehead, and we've seen this before too. The people have to have the name of the beast, the 666 on them. But then there are those who have the name of God. and they're the ones who get the benefit, and the ones who have the name of the beast on their forehead think that they have to have that to benefit, but in fact it's to their detriment. She's called Babylon, who is just a code name, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, and she is drunk with the blood of saints, the witnesses of Jesus. And he wondered greatly. And so naturally the angel asks, why do you wonder? Why are you concerned about this? In verses 7 and 8, the angel says to him, why do you wonder? I shall tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and to go to destruction. And those who dwell on the earth will wonder, whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast, that he was and is not, and will come. And notice that he has been wondering, but the angel reveals it to him. But when these things happen, they're going to look and they're going to wonder what's happened. And so this beast carries her, and he has these 7 heads and the 10 horns. He's a beast that was and is not, is about to come up from the abyss. And we'll see that a little bit more too. But the beast is the persecution of the Christians. And at the time this was written, they were in a lull where the Roman government was not actively persecuting them. Mm-hmm. And so the beast he is not right now, but he is going to come back and renew his oppression of the Christians. But his fate is to go to destruction. And those who dwell on the earth will wonder what's happening. They're the ones whose names are not written in the book of life since the foundation. So here's a book again. Some people have their name written in the book of life. Jesus opened a book. And this is the book where some names are not found. This is the book of life, and their names are not in it. And then when they see the beast, they wonder. Now the beast has 7 heads, and it says, here is the wisdom, the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And there are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. When he comes, he must remain a little while. We're getting a little bit closer to an explanation here, because the 7 heads are 7 mountains. Rome is set on 7 hills. In fact, its nickname has to do with the 7 hills. And so anybody back then would have immediately seen 7 mountains or 7 hills as Rome. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which she sits. And there are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. And we're going to look at that in just a little bit closer in just a minute. And so you have the 7 mountains, Rome, and there are 7 kings. 5 are in the past. There's 1 right now, and there's another one that hasn't come yet, and he will remain for a little while. The first 5 emperors were Augustus, Tiberius, Gaius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. Those were the first 5, and the persecution really started with Nero. And so after Nero, 5 have fallen, and that's the beast which was. That's the persecution. The next 3 didn't have time to do anything except conduct a civil war. Galba, Otto, Vitellius did nothing but fight and kill each other. And so Vespasian is the one who is the time when the book of Revelation is written. His son Titus is going to take over for him for just a short while, but then his other son Domitian is going to take over, and Domitian is going to renew the persecution with a vengeance. Mm-hmm. And so the beast that was and is not is persecution. It was with Nero. It hasn't been, but it will be when Domitian comes back. And so the beast that was and is not is the 8th. We're going to see that in just a second, what the 8th is. Just verse 11 says, and the beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. And Chuck wants to explain this for us, this riddle. We were talking about it before tonight, and he wanted to explain it to us. I
think he's going to take a hard pass.
Okay, he passed. The the 7th is also the 8th because 8 is the number of resurrection, of renewal. The code number for Jesus was 888 because the day after the 7th, the start of the new week, is the 8th day.
Okay.
And that's the start of the new week, the new life, or whatever. And so 8 was a number for Jesus. It's also a number for the rebirth of the persecution. And so he's the 7th, but he is also the 8th in the sense that the persecution, which was and is not, is going to renew with him.
Okay.
And so Domitian would be the one that would really actively renew the persecution. As we said before, Nero persecuted Christians because he was just wacky. But Domitian did it because he was just evil. And he was serious with the persecution. Then we had the 10 horns in verses 12 through 14. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those who are with him are the called, chosen, and faithful. We have 10 horns that are 10 kings, and they receive authority from the beast for 1 hour. Rome had a whole lot of little puppet kingdoms scattered all over the place. In fact, Rome wasn't defeated from outside so much as they just crumbled from within. Instead of having their own people be soldiers, they started hiring mercenaries. And the mercenaries really didn't care anything about Rome. As long as they got paid, they were fine. If they didn't get paid, they didn't care about fighting. And Rome just started entrusting everything to mercenaries and to all these little puppet kings everywhere. And they would end up being the destruction of Rome. Now, their purpose was to give power and authority to the beast, and they waged war against the Lamb, but fitting with the message of the book, the Lamb will overcome. The reason the Lamb will overcome is because he's the Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. Just another one of those calls to choose up sides. We can choose sides with the beast, with the 7 heads and the 10 horns, who's destined to lose, or we can choose sides with the Lamb, because the Lamb will overcome, and that would make us the chosen and the faithful. And so it's just a call to make a decision, to make a commitment.
This all fits in so well as well with the vision of Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel, with the kingdoms that were represented by the statue, and the stone that was cut without hands falls from the sky and smashes everything, and it's Rome is that final kingdom that it smashes, and it's broken up into pieces, and there's that one kingdom that remains that is an eternal kingdom, a kingdom ordained by God.
Right, you have the feet with the iron mixed with clay.
And the 10 toes.
And the 10 toes.
Yeah.
And then the clay degrades the iron. You don't have a pure metal anymore. It's just degraded.
From within.
Yeah, and so it's going to crumble. And it is interesting. You have this magnificent statue, gold and silver and bronze and iron, and this little stone cut out of the mountain without hands will bring all of them down during the time of the 10 toes.
Right.
Interesting. Then verse 15 describes the waters. As I said, we don't have to guess what the waters represent. And he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Waters generally represent nations in prophecy. This just fits right in with all prophetic languages. That's what the waters represent. And in case we can't figure out somewhere else what it represents, we just go here because it says what they represent. They represent the peoples and the multitudes and the nations and the tongues.
And John often does that through the book of Revelation when he's talking about the nations. There's often those four names, and it's not always the exact same four. Sometimes he uses kingdoms and tongues and tribes and everything, but there's almost always that designation of those four. 4 is an important number, is that terrestrial completeness, and so it's all the people of the earth.
He could have
affects everyone.
He could have left it all peoples,
or
all nations, but you're right. He spreads it over 4 things: peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. That includes everything of everything. Mm-hmm. It's all there, just in case there's something might be left out. Then verses 16 through 18 describe the fate of that harlot, what's going to happen to her. And the 10 horns which you saw in the beast, these will hate the harlot, will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose, and by giving their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God should be fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Ultimately, those 10 horns that she's given power to will end up hating her, and they will make her desolate and naked, and eat her flesh and burn her up with fire. That doesn't get much worse than this.
Yeah.
That's pretty total. But notice that this is all being done to execute God's purpose until the words of God are fulfilled.
Yeah.
And I think that may be a key line in the whole book, that what's happening is to execute God's purpose until his words are fulfilled. In Matthew 24:14, Jesus says, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world for a witness to all the nations, and then the end shall come." And there, in that chapter, he's talking primarily about the end of Jerusalem, the end of the Jewish system, that the gospel will be preached in all the nations. And in fact, as we go into the book of Acts, we find that's exactly what happened. It begins right there, on the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 1. Well, he makes the same promise in Acts chapter 1. It's not for you to know the times or epochs which the Father has fixed by his own authority, but you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. And you shall be my witnesses both in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and even to the remotest part of the earth. So Jesus promises to the apostles that that's what's going to happen. And it didn't take very long for that to start happening, because on the day of Pentecost, there were Jews from Jerusalem and in Jerusalem, Jews from every nation under heaven. And so on the day of Pentecost, there were people from all over the world who had an opportunity to hear the gospel message. Some of them went back home and took that with them. And so,
Well, the progression of events in the book of Acts, I mean, there's that declaration at the beginning, and then the rest of the stories in the book of Acts follow that exact progression. Jerusalem,
exactly.
Judea, Samaria, to the
and
ends of the earth.
that's an outline really for the book of Acts.
From Rome, it ends with Paul preaching the gospel in Rome, and from Rome you've reached the entire world.
Right. You've reached the center of the universe as far as they were concerned. And there are a lot more verses that I didn't put in here, but there are progressions through the book of Acts where you see this very thing spelled out. In Romans chapter 10, 17 and 18, it says, "So faith comes from hearing, and hearing by the word of Christ. But I say, surely they have never heard, have they? Indeed they have. Their voice has gone out into all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world." The 10 horns hate the harlot, they make her destitute, naked, eat her flesh, burn up with fire. But they don't know they're executing God's purpose until his words are fulfilled. She's the great city that reigns over the kings of the earth. That is Rome. But it's interesting to think about them executing God's purpose until the words of God are fulfilled. We've talked before about when Satan incited the Jews to kill Jesus, that Satan must have been really rejoicing because he had won. I won. I finally won. I got them to kill Jesus. He didn't know that was exactly God's plan. That's what God had in mind all along. You know that it says that at the right time, Christ died, that everything was done according to God's timetable. And throughout the book of John, you see that Jesus says, "My time has not come, my time has not come, my time has not come, my time has come."
Right.
The fullness of time was the Roman Empire. During the Roman Empire, you had roads that could take you everywhere. You had a common language of the Greek, the Koine Greek, that you could go anywhere and speak Greek. And then in addition, they had the miraculous ability to speak in other languages, but basically you could go anywhere and speak Greek and travel on Roman roads. And these Romans who think that they're going to take out the Lamb, God's using them. He's using their roads, he's using the language, he's using the peace that allows people to roam around freely. Paul was a Roman citizen that gave him certain rights that other people didn't have, and they had no clue that they were executing God's purpose until his words were fulfilled.
Yeah.
And God's will always be carried out, no matter what we think. We cannot fool or foil God.
Right.
He will be victorious.
You follow that story all the way through the Bible. Pharaoh didn't know that he was fulfilling God's plan by enslaving the people, and Nebuchadnezzar didn't know he was fulfilling God's plan, and Cyrus might have understood because they showed him. But here's your name. But
Yeah, but all along these nations that thought they were the grand nations of the world didn't know that they were just kind of following God's plan that was laid out already in that statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw, and they were just being used by God. Right. They thought it was the other way around, which brings us to chapter 18.
Chapter 18. This is, one writer called this chapter the handwriting on the wall moment for Rome. If we compare it back to the book of Daniel, where King Belshazzar saw the handwriting on the wall, and you've been weighed, you've been measured, and been found wanting or found lacking. And that very night, the kingdom was taken from him. This is kind of that moment for Rome, where the handwriting is on the wall for them. This is their come to realization moment that things are not going to work out the way they thought they were. And this chapter is modeled after the doom announcements of the Old Testament. I like do we have doom announcements in our vernacular today? I don't know if we do or not, but
if they do, they're not quite like those.
Maybe like Ronald Reagan said, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help."
I'm here to help.
Okay,
yeah,
but
that's a doom announcement.
So, but it's modeled after even some of the chapters that we've read in the last couple of books that we studied with Daniel and Ezekiel, when it gets into the judgment of other nations, or if you've been reading through the look at the book readings, and we're in Isaiah, there's doom announced to other nations in Isaiah, and coming in Jeremiah, there's going to be the same thing. So this chapter is sort of modeled after that style of writing, where there's a kingdom that God has a problem with, and God is going to outline what his problem with that kingdom is and what he's going to do about it. And this is Revelation chapter 18. So verses 1 through 3 start out with, "After these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illumined with his glory. And he cried out with mighty voice, saying, 'Fallen is Babylon the Great, and she has become a dwelling place of demons, and a prison of every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean something or other.'"
Sorry.
That's all right. Hateful, every unclean and hateful bird. There we go.
That's a bad bird.
That's a bad thing. "For all nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality." So again, we see how often do our sections in John start with an "I saw an angel" or "I saw this," and so here's this angel coming out of heaven, and that, considering everything that we've seen up to this point, we know that when something originates in heaven, that originates with God. So whatever this angel's purpose is, whatever he's doing, whatever message he's bringing, whatever he says, whatever he does, it originates from God, because he is coming from heaven. Not only that, but he is illumined with glory. And so God is the only creature, the only being that is self-illuminated. If we have a light in us, it's because we reflect the light of Christ that is in us. We don't possess that light of our own, but God does possess that light. God is light. And so if he is illumined with glory, then it's because he is reflecting God's glory.
Kind of like Moses when he had been talking to God.
I think very much like Moses. It's a signal that this angel has been in the presence of God and has received his message from God. He cries out with a mighty voice. And again, the idea of a mighty voice, we hear that, we see that over and over and over again. When John sees an angel or a being with some authority speaking, they speak with a loud voice. We've talked about that before. He's not kind of whispering in the corner, "Hey, if you have time to get around to this, let's think about it." He is booming this forth because it originates from God, and it carries weight, it carries authority with it. And so what is it that he pronounces? He pronounces, "Fallen is Babylon the Great." And so it's repeated. We've seen this phrase already before in the book of Revelation, but it's repeated for emphasis. It's a double declaration of what is happening to Babylon. Isaiah chapter 21 verse 9 says, "Now behold, here comes a troop of riders, horsemen in pairs, and one answered and said, 'Fallen is Babylon, and all the images of her gods are shattered on the ground.'" And so this is a prediction of the fall of actual Babylon after the destruction of Jerusalem. And that was a kind of a conundrum for the prophets. How can God use a pagan nation like Babylon to come and discipline his people who were supposed to be his people? So I think it was Habakkuk even asked, how can one who is more evil than we are be the ones that's going to punish us? But God has his means and his purposes. And so, but God does not leave them unpunished. God is going to pronounce punishment against Babylon. And so it's a repetition of that original declaration that Isaiah makes. And we've seen that before in Revelation 14, verse 8. Another angel, a second one, followed, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who has made all the nations drink of the wine of the passion of her immorality. In Revelation 14, if I remember right, that's the chapter where we just saw this rapid succession of angels coming and making pronouncements and declarations. And so that was that second declaration that came and said, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. So just a repetition of something that we've already seen before. The great city is abandoned, and so here we've had the city identified. We know that the city is the one that sits on the seven hills. It's the great city. It's Rome, and so now the great city is abandoned. It becomes a ghost town. That would have been completely inconceivable that the city of Rome could ever be decimated to this point, that they could be undone from the position that they were in. But we've seen that kind of pronouncement before, and we'll see some comparisons later on to some of the past chapters that we've seen in the previous books that we did, but especially in Ezekiel. We saw similar pronouncements about Tyre and about some of those kingdoms that were tremendous kingdoms that had built tremendous reputations for themselves, that had tremendous power and wealth and luxury, and yet God comes in and says it won't be very long until they are utterly destroyed, and there won't be anything left but the jackals. And here it is again, this pronouncement against this wealthy city that we can't picture being anything other than as she is, and yet God says she's going to become a ghost town. The nations and the kings and the merchants are here identified as three different kind of subgroups or subsets of people that have profited or benefited from the position of Rome. The nations, it says they've drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality. And again, we have that juxtaposition thing going on because we've seen in a couple of places over the last few weeks the idea of Rome drinking of the full wrath of God's, or the full measure of God's wrath. And yet here, those who have benefited from their relationship with Rome have drunk of the passion of her immorality. So what is it that partaking of her immorality gets you? It gets you a second helping, and that second helping is the drinking of the wine of God's wrath. The kings here committed, it says they committed acts of immorality with her. They sold their souls. They laid aside those things that any reasonable, normal human being should have known was right, and they laid all that aside in order to benefit and gain from her wealth. So it didn't matter that Rome was persecuting Christians. It didn't matter that Rome was following after false gods and pagan religions. Even though common sense tells us those things are bad, we're going to overlook those things, and we're going to do business with her because we like what she has to offer. She offers us wealth. And then the merchants, again, in the same boat, literally in the same boat. They became rich by the wealth of her sensuality. They were willing to buy what she was peddling. And so in previous chapters, we've seen the idea of the beast or of the dragon or the prophet beguiling and fooling the people by the things that she had to say. But in this sense, we're given the idea that she didn't have to work real hard at it. She didn't have to sell her false her falsities and her lies very hard. Because of what she was offering, because of the wealth and the prestige she was offering, they were willing to go down that path. And so on the one hand, because she was condemned for fooling everybody, it almost seems like there were innocent bystanders, but that's not the way it's presented here at all. They're not innocent bystanders. They were willing participants in her evil. And so they are culpable for the same punishment that that is being pronounced against her. Revelation 18, verses 4 through 8. And I heard another voice from heaven. You see this time and time again. Heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, that you may not participate in her sins, and that you may not receive of her plagues. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back even as she is paid, and give back to her double according to her deeds in the cup which she has mixed twice as much for her." To the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously, to the same degree give her torment and mourning. For she says in her heart, "I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and will never see mourning." For this reason, in one day her plagues will come, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire, for the Lord God who judges her is strong. So another voice from heaven. Again, we have that same pattern that we see over and over again, just this rapid succession of angels coming forth directly from heaven, directly from God's throne, bringing pronouncements of judgment. And this angel calls out. The first angel is calling out in general, fallen is Babylon. Now this angel addresses God's people. Come out of her, my people. Don't get caught up in the destruction because you're kind of trying to live on the periphery of her sin, her degradation. And so we understand that sometimes as people of God, we still live in the world, we still participate in some things that the world participates in, but we shouldn't get caught up in doing those worldly things to the point that when it's time to exit from that or to take ourselves away from the world, that we're like Lot's wife and we can't turn away. We get taken into that. And so they're called out for two purposes. One, to avoid her sins, to not be taken up in the things that she's doing, but also to avoid the destruction and the punishment that she's going to bear because of her sins. When Jesus was talking about the coming destruction of Jerusalem, what did he tell the people? When you see
these signs,
when you see these things come to pass, get out. Don't wait. Don't turn back and don't look back. Leave. And history records that not very many Christians were caught up in that destruction because they heeded that warning. And so we have a similar warning being given here against Rome. It says her sins were piled up to the heavens, and one commentator likened that to the Tower of Babel, how they tried to build a brick and mortar building up to heaven and were thwarted by God. Here they have erected a monument of sin that reaches up to the heavens, and that's their lasting monument. So Jeremiah 51 verse 9.
Before we go there, I want God wants it. He calls his people to come out and be separate.
Yes.
He does not want us to mingle, to see how close we can come. And that's why we are a peculiar people.
Peculiar. We're
different
apart
from everybody else. We're set apart.
Set apart, holy.
We don't come as close as we can.
Right.
He wants us to be separate, be holy.
And when it comes right down to it, here he's actually calling them out of there. Don't even try to be close. Don't even be in close physical proximity, let alone spiritual proximity. And so here, Jeremiah 51:9, we applied healing to Babylon, but she was not healed. Forsake her, and let us each go to his own country, for her judgment has reached to heaven and towers up to the very skies. And then Ezra chapter 9, this is after they have returned, a remnant has returned to the promised land, and the sin of intermarrying with foreign wives has been made known to Ezra, that there have been people who have done that, and Ezra confesses that sin. But here in verses 5 and 6, he says, "But at the evening offering I rose from my humiliation, even with my garment, my robe torn, and I fell on my knees and stretched out my hands to the Lord my God, and said, O my God, I'm ashamed and embarrassed to lift up my face to thee, O my God, for our iniquities have risen above our heads, and our guilt has grown even to the heavens." So there's that idea of a monument of sin that's being erected that, Jesus says evil men love the dark because they think it'll hide their deeds. Our evil deeds are stacked up like a monument if we have not done anything to remove them, and only God can remove them. We can't remove them ourselves. And so we need to understand that if we are not forgiven by the blood of the Lamb, that those sins stand as a monument to our deeds. So the interesting thing here, her sins are piled up to the heavens, and it says, and God remembered her sins. But how does God treat the sins of his people? Like, if you're God's children, what does he do with your sins? Does he remember them?
No, he wipes them out.
Yeah.
Eliminates them.
So Psalm 103 verse 12 says, as far as the east is from the west, so far as he removed our transgressions from us. So we have a juxtaposition here. We have the sins of a pagan empire that stand as a monument to her immorality. But when it comes to the sins of God's people, God wipes those sins away. He removes them and no longer lets them stand there as a monument, as a tribute to what they've done. And so that choice that's being presented all through the book of Revelation is presented here once again for us. Who do we want to be? Do we want to be God's people that have the sins removed, or do we want to be the pagans who God remembers their sins? Hebrews chapter 8, verses 11 and 12 also add to that, and they shall not teach everyone his fellow citizen and everyone his brother, saying, know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest of them, for I will be merciful to their iniquities, and I will remember their sins no more. So we have a choice to be part of God's kingdom or to be part of Babylon. Shouldn't be a hard choice to make.
It's not a hard choice at all. It was at the time, though. It's presented in such a false way that it looks attractive to people.
Yeah.
So we have to use a little bit of good judgment and wisdom, because Satan doesn't make things look the way they really are. He's always lying, and so it's going to look a whole lot better than it is.
Right. And there again, I'm going to use the word juxtaposition again. Is that okay?
That's a good word.
So the way Satan makes sin look, put that in juxtaposition to the way God makes sin look. And a lot of Revelation is hard to read. It's hard to feel good about reading sometimes because of the imagery, because of the stark nature of it, because of the violence of it. And yet God is being real. He's being very truthful with us about the consequences of sin, whereas Satan, when he presents sin to us, makes it look good. Well, who do you appreciate there? You appreciate
It depends.
Right. Yeah. And so here, back to Revelation 18. So the pronouncement of judgment here, he says, give back to her double. We've seen this kind of through the book of Revelation a time or two already, where when the punishment is meted out, we're almost taken aback by that. But then maybe an angel steps forward and says, this is right, this is good, this is proper judgment that is being pronounced, because they are that evil, they are that bad. Sin is that bad of a thing that when God steps forth in his full wrath, it's not too much, it's not overdoing it. And so he says, give back to her double, and that's the indication here that the punishment fits the severity of her crimes. She's getting what she deserves. There's no other way to say it. And then the torment in the morning, I thought it was an interesting comparison, where the punishment was to be given back double, but the torment in the morning are in accord with or to the same level as her self-glorification. And so, and I don't know that there's anything to be made a big point there, but I just thought it was interesting that one of them is double, but one of them is on level with. And the humiliation is in accordance with her self-glorification. So however much Rome has glorified herself and said, look how great I am, God is going to pile up humiliation to that same level and say, look how awful she is. To the extent that her crimes have elevated her above others, and her crimes have given her position over others, God is going to double that and say, here's the punishment that is going to bring you down twice as far.
It may be hard to double her self-glorification, because she was sure full of herself.
Well, the emperors believed they were gods. You can't get much more self-aggrandized than that. No. So, verses 9 and 10 says, the kings of the earth who committed acts of immorality and lived sensuously with her will weep and lament over her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. So those who profited from her immorality now witness her destruction. And there is no honor among thieves. That's an old saying, isn't it? And this is the same kings mentioned in chapter 17 too. We have a unified story going here through chapter 17 and 18. And it's the things that we saw introduced in 17 are taking place in 18. They are standing back at a distance watching her burn. Why are they not coming to her rescue?
They don't have the power.
They don't have the power. They don't have the gumption. They don't.
That's the thing. Throughout a lot of these, we see these examples here in Revelation. They're not so concerned about her as they are what they're losing.
Mm-hmm. And that's it. That's exactly it. They're mourning not for the loss of their beloved trade partner. We don't love Rome so much that we're sad she's going. We love what she brought us so much that we're sad to see her going. We loved the wealth that she brought us, the position that she brought us. We loved the opportunity that she brought us. But frankly, if she's gone and we can find somebody else to bring us that opportunity, we're good. Mm-hmm. And so there is no loyalty there to Rome itself. The loyalty is there for what they gained from that relationship with Rome. And so this is, again, a part of the judgment that they deserve. Because they had sold their souls, so to speak, in order to participate in business with Rome, it's not, we're not supposed to mourn for them or feel sorry for them that their mercantile is disrupted. Now they stand at a distance when earlier they sought intimacy. They when Rome was, everything was going great for Rome, everybody wanted to be her best friend. We wanted to talk about, me and Rome, we're tight, we're good. But now that she's being burned, we're going to step back from that and say, yeah, maybe I didn't know her very well after all. And so they are now seeking distance instead of intimacy with her. Verses 11 through 20, kind of a longer section, but it informs everything up to this point. It just elaborates on the relationship that these ancillary kingdoms and merchants and nations and everybody had with Rome. It says, and the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and every kind of citron wood and every article of ivory and every article made from every costly wood and bronze and iron and marble and cinnamon and spice and incense and perfume and frankincense and wine and olive oil and fine flour and wheat and cattle and sheep and cargoes of horses and chariots and slaves and human lives. And a partridge. Okay. And the fruit you long for has gone from you, and all things that were luxurious and splendid have passed away from you, and men will no longer find them. The merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand at a distance because of the fear of her torment, weeping and mourning, saying, woe, woe, the great city, she who was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour such great wealth has been laid waste. And every shipmaster and every passenger and sailor and as many as make their living by the sea stood at a distance and were crying out as they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what city is like the great city? And they threw dust on their heads and were crying out, weeping and mourning, saying, woe, woe, the great city, in which all who had ships at sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she has been laid waste. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her. So now the merchants who had become rich are in mourning. And this, again, remember Ezekiel chapter 27. We're not going to read the whole thing, but it's very similar to this when it recounts the destruction of Tyre. And Tyre was that great merchant city who was kind of the hub of all trade within that region. If you had an imported item in your home, it came through Tyre. And so for this day and age, if you were part of the Roman Empire and you had an imported good from some other country, it probably came through Rome, because that was the hub of all economic activity. And so many of those same things, the gold and the silver and the wood and the livestock and all of those things are mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 27 as part of that list of things that Tyre was known for. So the economic loss would have been devastating for those who had benefited. And they would have been wondering, how do we overcome that? How do we get that economic gain back? The items here listed here represent worldwide trade partners. This literally was the center of the known world. And so they are trading with everybody. And just like we did with Tyre, when we put a map up on the board for Tyre and we talked about where those things came from, and we made a big circle all the way around Tyre, that was the known world of the time. We could do the same thing here with Rome, and that they were getting all of these traded items from all over the world. Rome's glory was found in her wealth and her material possessions that she garnered from around the world. But when that was lost, when the trade was no more, what happened to her glory?
It's gone.
It was gone.
And it's almost easy to miss in that list, the last thing on the list, and human lives. Has all those material things.
Right.
And then it gets down to slaves and human lives. Just like it's just an afterthought, just all in with everything else.
Those who depended on Rome for their wealth would be shocked by her downfall. Again, they can't fathom the destruction of Rome. And one thing that I didn't put in the notes, but several times through that reading, if you caught it specified the amount of time it took for Rome to fall. Mm-hmm. How long did it take?
1 hour. It's like
1 hour
right now, and she's gone.
Yeah, I mean, and does that mean literally that everybody in Rome woke up one morning and an hour later Rome fell?
No, but it's that prophetic measurement there.
Right.
1 hour is just not a whole lot.
It's not a short time. Or it's not a long time. It is a short time. And when you compare how quickly Rome fell compared to how long she existed as a world empire, the end came pretty quick for Rome. And there was, once that end began, once that progression or that slide towards the end started, there was no stopping it. There was no stopping that internal decay. So there might be a lesson there, maybe for some other nations.
Probably so.
And then at the end of that section, again, it's almost like an afterthought. It's almost like a kind of an appendix to that long litany of things that are listed about Rome and why we've gotten to this point. At the very end, it's like, and now you, saints and apostles and prophets, rejoice. It's interesting the number of times through the book of Revelation when we see these pronouncements of judgment that there's very often accompanied with that a rejoicing of the righteous. Why is it okay for us to rejoice that all of these people are being doomed?
It's because of what they did to God, not because of what they did to us.
Right.
And Jesus could be righteously indignant because of what people were doing to God, and overthrow tables and so forth. He didn't act that way toward injustices toward him.
Right.
But he really was, he didn't like God being treated that way. So there's a difference in us responding for a wrong that we suffer and responding for a wrong that God suffers.
And when God's will is accomplished, it is cause for God's people to rejoice. And if this is the triumph, and we've talked about that word victory, if this is the victory of good over evil, if this is the victory of God's will over the beast, over Rome, over the devil, if this is God's victory, it's right for us to rejoice. And so God's people are given that command to rejoice because God is winning. The chapter ends here, verses 21 to 24, says, "And a strong angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, 'Thus will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence and will not be found any longer. And the sound of the harpists and musicians and flute players and trumpeters will not be heard in you any longer, and no craftsman of any craft will be found in you any longer, and the sound of a mill will not be heard in you any longer, and the light of a lamp will not shine in you any longer, and the voice of the bridegroom and the bride will not be heard in you any longer. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, because all of the nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in her was found the blood of the prophets and of saints and all who have been slain on the earth.'" So there again, it's interesting. Aren't all angels strong?
All angels are strong, but I guess this is a strong angel.
This is one who's, what John notices about this angel is his strength. And I don't know what angels look like, and I don't know how you tell one from the other, but this one was a strong angel. And any angel can do whatever he wants to do that he's been commanded by God to do. But if you've got a strong angel, that's got to be a sight to behold. So that is just an interesting moniker there for him. And he takes a stone like a millstone, like a giant millstone, and casts it into the sea. How much would one of those weigh? Maybe 10, 12 pounds?
It depends on the mill. There were personal sized ones, and then there were industrial sized ones.
Yeah, this is one of those industrial sized ones.
They were huge.
This is probably 1 to 2 tons.
Yeah, they were the big.
And it is one that would have been turned not by hand or by people, but by beast. This was a big millstone, or a big stone like a big millstone. And it was picked up by that angel. So there's the strong angel, and it was cast into the sea. Think about what a big giant millstone does when it's cast into the sea.
It spreads waves everywhere.
Does it think about sinking?
Oh, it goes straight to the bottom.
It doesn't think about sinking, it sinks.
Yeah.
And is there any recovering it?
Not unless you're a strong angel.
Not unless you're a strong angel. So this is a symbol of the finality of God's decision here. This is not going to be undone. We're not going to go down and retrieve that millstone and bring it back up and replace it. God has spoken, and it's going to be accomplished. So this is a symbol of Babylon the Great, and it's done. It's spoken of in the past tense. Is Rome fallen yet?
No, but it's a done deal.
And yet the angel says fallen. Mm-hmm. So the angel speaks of it. The millstone has been cast into the sea. All of this is being presented in the past tense, even though it hasn't happened yet in John's day. And so, but because God has ordained that it will happen, we can talk of it as having happened. 6 times the angel uses the term "not any longer." And so as you look at all those things, no music will be heard any longer, no celebrations, no crafts, no weddings, none of these things will take place any longer. And that is, again, an indication of the complete nature of the pronouncement of judgment against Babylon. 3 reasons here are given for Rome's destruction. First, it says the merchants were the great men of the earth. These were, this here was an indication, there in that last verse, it says, last verse. It says getting old, Gary, my eyes don't work as well.
Oh, man.
For your merchants were the great men of the earth, because all of the nations were deceived by your sorcery, and in her was found the blood of the prophets. So the merchants were the great men of the earth. The earth was laid at Rome's feet. She had every opportunity to be a blessing to the world that could have been given her to be a blessing to the world. And yet she used what she had been given to elevate herself and to hold people down, to hurt people. The nations were deceived by her sorcery. She led other nations into her deception. She led them into her false religions. She led them into her immoral business practices, all of those things. Other nations were deceived by her sorceries. And that final straw, that final pronouncement of judgment is because the blood of the prophets and saints flowed through her streets. She was responsible for the death of the righteous, and that God could not allow to stand. So how many times have we seen that idea through the book of Revelation where the saints are asking, how long, O Lord, will you let this stand against us? Or then there's a moment of silence in heaven where their prayers are elevated to the throne. Or there's some symbol that's given to us to show us that it is Rome's treatment of God's people that really is a driving force behind his pronouncement of judgment against them.
Exactly.
We see it again.
Yeah. We do have questions. We have no time.
I figured out a way to make our classes shorter.
How?
If we just print it in a smaller font,
Oh, yeah. We could
then they would be shorter. And maybe we could get through.
This is 12.
This is 12.
I think I'll go to 10.
If we go to 10, that'd save us. Save us about 1/8.
We could use half as many slides. Just cram it.
Oh, there we go. That'd be a good idea. Smaller fonts on the slides.
On the slides, and I think that's a good idea.
See there.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Thank you very much.